All right, so when Adam and Eve ultimately eat the fruit, the first thing that it says that happens to them is that they realize that they're naked. And then what they do is that, knowing that they're naked, they hide themselves from each other. They sew fig leaves. The key for us in understanding all of these statements is in the last part, is in the very end of the statement, where God says to Adam, "From dust you are, and from dust you will return." If you remember, in the second creation account, God gathers the dust of the earth and then blows the spirit into the dust, and that is how man becomes a living spirit, becomes a living being. And so, when you look at that, you might at the outset think, okay, and then they leave the garden. It's like, well, if God said that they would die, why don't they just drop dead? Why don't they just eat the fruit and drop dead? And I think it's because people do. Death is one of those things that we think we understand, but that we usually don't have very good definitions for, that we don't totally understand what it is that they're referring to. Death is something that doesn't just apply to a person, but that applies at every level, every ontological level of reality. There's analogies to what death is at every ontological level. And this is, of course, what's going on here, is that all the elements are trying to help us understand what death is. We have a kind of origin story for death. And like I said, the clue is in the idea of dust. The idea is that now you will become dust. Dust is basically an amass of things that have no relationship with each other, right? That's what dust is. And then God gathers the dust together, all these dispersed elements, and then he puts a spirit in it. He puts a breath in it. He puts heaven inside. He puts a name inside. He puts meaning inside. He puts purpose inside. He puts all the things that are invisible patterns that legislate dispersed elements. He puts that in this gathering of dust, and now the dust is animated. Now the dust is no longer dust, but is one being, even though it's still made of dust. And so this is the difference between life and death. The difference between life and death is the difference between unity, which contains multiplicity, and multiplicity, which no longer has unity, bringing it together. That is the difference between life and death. All these different elements in an animal that are moving towards the purpose of survival, the purposes that animals have, and then all of a sudden something happens to the animal. Now the breath leaves, right? The spirit leaves the animal. And now the elements of the animal no longer cohere completely towards purpose. And that's why they will start to decompose. The elements will start to break apart from each other. It takes time, but at the moment of death, that process has already begun. There's a mystery by which death is actually part of life, but that would be too complicated to talk about that right now. But the idea of something that is dead is something that has lost now its unitary purpose. Now, this is the best way to understand what death is, and it can be applied at different levels of reality. So if you understand that that is what it means for you to die, so when you die, your body now is still there, but it starts to decompose because there's nothing holding it together towards purpose. So you can understand then that all the things that move you away from your purpose are akin, at least, to death. That is sickness, for example. When your body is breaking down and is not capable of properly moving towards its purpose, then that is a process of death. Old age, when you get older and your body starts to wither and it no longer easily moves towards the purpose that you have for the body, then that old age is also akin to death. Now, it's not arbitrary that both disease and old age do lead to death in the absolute sense, like in the sense that now there really is this complete separation between the reason, the spirit, the unifying principle, and the disparate elements. And you can see the process all along, but this is what it is that you're supposed to understand. But now you can also apply to anything that has commonality. And so you can say, with a true analogy, you can say, well, the death of my friendship with this person. And so what does the death of my friendship with this person mean? It's not like, we don't cease to exist. Like me and Bob, we were still there. So what does it mean for our friendship to die? It means that the thing that bound us together, that created a third reality, which is our relationship, which is the communion of us together, is now gone. And because of that, now Bob and I are going our separate ways. It's if you say the end or the death of an empire, the end of the death of a nation, that's the same thing. The things that made the empire are still there, right? The remainders of the buildings, the matter, the people are there. But what happens is now they no longer have a reason in order to join together and to participate in a common identity. It's true for the death of a company, for the death of anything that you can imagine that has a unifying principle holding it together towards purpose, and then that principle going away, the elements now disperse and become something like food for something else. They become potential for other beings. So, it's like if I'm no longer friends with Bob, I can still be friends with someone else. And so that, like let's say friendship is complicated because multiple. Let's say I'm married to someone and then I get divorced and that's the death of our marriage, but now I become potential for another relationship that I can engage in. And that's true for nations, it's true for companies, et cetera, okay? And so this is what dying means, and this is what begins to happen at the fall.